Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Audio Cycling YouTube channel, where today I am going to be previewing the Velogames Criterium du Dauphiné, the big build up towards the Tour de France, and we do have one of the big favourites for the Tour de France this year, and that is Primoz Roglic, alongside a very stacked Jumbo Visma team, including second place at the Tour de France last year, Jonas Vingegaard, and also Wout van Aert, who is going to be a key domestique for Primoz Roglic. So, Primoz Roglic obviously is going to be the most expensive rider at 24, and I actually think this is pretty good value, and I think that Primoz Roglic will be selected by the majority of teams. The long individual time trial in the middle of a race really suits him and also suits his teammates, and I think that Jumbo Visma are the big favourites for this race, and if they don't win, I think something has gone drastically wrong. So I would highly recommend you pick Primoz Roglic. I think he could certainly be contesting 3-4 stages in this race. Enric Mas for 18 is a good option. I think he should be finishing inside the top 10, but I do prefer Wout van Aert as the 18 pointer, just because he will be able to contest in the sprints, which I think he will be likely doing to try and prepare for the green jersey hunt that he's going for in the Tour. But he's also very good at the TT, which will give him additional points over Mas, who really should only be gaining in some of the mountaintop finishes and also perhaps in like the final GC. But I think Wout van Aert will build up enough of a buffer by that point, but it won't really matter. 16-point riders, you've got David Gaudu and Haig, and you've also got many other GC riders who all have the same issue, in that their time trialing just isn't good enough to be competitive with the likes of Primoz Roglic. Gaudu and Haig are just two good examples of this. They will be competitive on stages 3, 7 and 8, but they will lose time in that TT. Saying that, they should still finish inside the top 10 and will still net somewhere between 400 to 500 points, I would estimate. You do also have Damiano Caruso, who would be, I think, a good option for Bahrain as well. I don't think he'll be a domestique. He should have his own freedom opportunities in this race, and I think that he will be a very good leader alongside Haig, and I expect both of them to finish in the top 10. Kelderman is one of the people who has just come off of a Giro d'Italia, and I will be saying that I wouldn't recommend the Giro d'Italia riders just because they will be extremely fatigued. Another week long stage race isn't going to be great for them, I don't think. Ben O'Connor would be another one who finishes inside the top 10, but of all the 14 pointers, Jonas Vingegaard seems to be the best one. I think quite underrated at 14. I would expect him to maybe be 16 or 18. His very good individual time trial, he says that he's better at the longer ones. I expect him to be another popular pick, and he's probably going to be the best 14-point rider. You've got a lot of good 12-point riders, including Juan Ayuso, Brandon McNulty, Ethan Hayter, Dylan Teuns and Patrick Conrad. For me, I think the best one is Ethan Hayter, just because of the TT and the potential reduced bunch sprints that him and Wout van Aert should be competing for. I expect it to be a bit like the Tour of Britain last year in that sense. But you could also say that Ayuso and McNulty are good options. McNulty is the option for UAE Team Emirates. They say here in their press release that McNulty will be going for the GC hunt and they'll have Milano for the sprints. So make of that what you will. I'm not fully convinced that Ayuso will be just a domestique. I think that he will also be probably the best climber. I think he's a better climber than McNulty and should also be going for GC as well. But Hayter will probably be netting the most points of all the 12-point riders. In my opinion, I think that he could get something like 600 because he could compete in 4 or 5 stages possibly, as long as the breakaway doesn't take all the victories. Then you got quite a few 10-point riders. I wouldn't recommend a lot of them. I think that Catania's a good one. I know I recommended him for Tour of Romandy and he did terribly, but Catania, because he wasn't selected for the Giro, the Tour will be his big goal, and to be selected for the Tour he has to put in a good performance in this race. The long time trial suits him, and also the lack of kind of mountaintop finishes. The last stage is probably going to be the biggest test for him, but I think that for 10 points he's quite good. And I'd say the other one is Tobias Harland Johannesson, the winner of Tour de l'Avenir last year, showed some good form in the recent Tour of Norway. He finished top 10 in the Volta Catalunya as well, so he's got some good GC credentials, but again will lose time on the time trial. Other than that, you've got a lot of breakaway riders like climbers, so you've got Barguil, you've got Bonamore, Chavez, Guerrero, Mark Perdun, who of course did brilliantly at this race last year, and Michael Storer. For me, I think that the range of stages that these guys have to be competitive in is relatively small, and therefore to maximise your points it would be better to go with Harland Johannesson or Catania. possibly even Theo Gegenhardt as well would be a good option. But the relative number of stages that these breakaway riders are going to have to fight for glory, especially the ones who are climbers, is relatively small. So I'd be avoiding them as much as possible. 8-point riders, you've got some really good ones. You've got Badjoli, who's kind of like a nice puncher, won that stage in the Barcelona stage in the Volta Catalunya. You've got a series of sprinters as well. You've got Phil Bauhaus, but you also have Jordi Meus. You've got Milano, you've got Stuyven as well. So lots of good ones there. I'm not fully convinced that some of these sprinters will make it to the finish all the time. I think that Stuyven is likely the safest one. He did some good results at the Dauphiné last year and has a bit of a better kind of climbing ceiling in comparison to a Milano, in comparison to a Phil Bauhaus, for example. But other than that, you've got some good time trialists. You've got Cavagna and Ganna. If you wanted to pick those, they will be competitive on the TT. Ganna, bear in mind, although he will likely win the TT, he won't be competitive in too many other stages, so just be wary about that. But Cavagna will do well in the time trial, and because Quickstep don't have a sprinter in this race, he might have some freedom to go into the breakaways. So Cavagna overall has a higher potential of scoring more points than Ganna, although Ganna has a higher chance of actually winning a stage, if you see what I mean. Dunbar is quite underrated at 80. He's had a good series of results, although not in the highest caliber races. It was like Coppa Bartoli, the Tour of Hungary as well. But he does look in really good shape. He will just hemorrhage a lot of time on the TT as well. But I do like Eddie Dunbar. I think he could finish top 10 in this race for sure. And other than that, you got a lot of breakaway riders like Jorgensen, Lefay, Madwa. Louis Mienquez has looked really good recently as well. And Nick Schultz. Again, as I said earlier, their scope for getting points in stages is relatively small in comparison to some of the sprinters. I would be favouring the sprinters and the time trialists and maybe even Eddie Dunbar as the best 8-pointers. In terms of 6-pointers, you do have quite a lot. You've got Bruno Amaral. If you remember back to Basque Country, he was looking really good there. Steph Kras is consistently putting in performances anywhere between 10th and 20th on GC in his current races. He finished 11th at the Tour of Romandy, and I think he's looking in very good form. I think that he might net you somewhere like 150 to 200 points depending on how he's going. So a relatively safe option. If you wanted to go a little bit more kind of risky, you could go like Simon Geschke, who did good in the Tour of Romandy. He finished 3rd in GC there. If he has the same legs as he did in that race, I would say that he's probably the best 6-pointer, but I'm not sure how his legs are going at the moment, so I'm going to be a little bit apprehensive about that. You've got Tobias Harlan Johansson's twin brother, Anders, if you wanted to pick him as well. And then you've got 2 sprinters here. You've got Mathis Louvel and Luca Mozzato. These are sprinters who can climb relatively well, and I think that Arkea put into their press release that Matthias Louvel will be their trump card when it comes to some reduced bunch sprints. I think that both of these are very good choices and could be competitive for 2 to 3 sprints in this race, which could net you something along the lines of 200 points roughly. Postelberger won a stage of this race last year. Sean Quinn has looked pretty impressive in some like GC performances in the Tour of the Alps and also Tour of Romandy recently. I've been very impressed by him. Other than him, you've also got Benjamin Thomas, who's won a race recently, Antonio Tiberi, who won that mountaintop finish in Hungary, Maxime Van Hils, although there's not too much terrain that massively suits Maxime Van Hils in this race, I must point out. And then Clément Venturini will be the sprinter for AG2R Citroën. Carlos Verona will likely be domestiquing for Enric Mas, but also has a tendency to pick up some pretty good GC places. And then Matt Walls, you don't know if they'll be sprinting for Meus or Walls, so it's a little bit tricky between them. I'd more than likely choose Mozzato or Louvel just because they are the certain sprinter for their respective teams. 4-point riders, I think the best ones are some of the DSM youngsters like Marco Brenner, but also ones towards the bottom like Henry van den Abel and also Kevin Vermaker. They all have good potential to do some good breakaway victories or maybe some sneaky performances in GC. But I think the best 4-point rider, in my opinion, is Lawrence Huys, who recently finished 7th place in GC at the Tour of Norway, which was won by Remco Evenepoel. And more importantly, he finished 5th on the big mountaintop finish on the exact same time as Tobias Harlan Johannesson, who was a 10-point rider. So I think that Lawrence Huys could be a sneaky 4-point pick for you all to go with. Other than that, there aren't too many which are massively impressive. Ryabashenko has been fast in the past, but hasn't really shown that as of late. And other than that, you're really picking riders to perhaps go into the breakaway and pick you some points up in that way. In terms of what I would strongly recommend, I think that Wout van Aert, Primoz Roglic and even Hayter are the must-have riders in your team. Other than that, it's fairly fair game. I would say that the 6-point riders of Louvel and Mozarto are pretty good. And other than that, I'd say just go wild. If you wanted to definitely pick up a TT win, pick Ganna if you wanted that. But other than that, yeah, just make sure you pick probably Primoz Roglic and Wout van Aert and maybe even Hayter. I think those are the best 3 riders who I would strongly recommend you put onto your team. But let me know in the comments down below, have I missed anybody? Who are you thinking of putting onto your teams? And can anybody beat Primoz Roglic in this race? Be sure to put all that in the comments down below. And all that is left to say is to keep safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!